Welcome to Haunted Forgotten. I'm Victoria. Today we're in Bridgeport, Connecticut, exploring the events that unfolded at 966 Lindley Street. This ordinary home became the center of one of America's most controversial and enduring paranormal cases. Let's step back to November 1974. In November 1974, police officers would watch furniture move by itself, a refrigerator slide across the floor, and a child levitate before their eyes. To truly understand the violence that erupted at 966 Lindley Street in the winter of 1974, you have to look past the mid-century siding and beneath the cracked asphalt of Bridgeport's north end. Long before this patch of earth was heavy with industrial smoke and noise, it was known as the Pequannock, an Algonquin word meaning cleared land. It was the ancient planting grounds of the Pequot nation. To the people of the Pequot, a human being possessed two distinct souls. While the vital essence journeyed onward after death, the dream soul, the Kuwawonk, remained deeply bound to the physical landscape. If the soil was disrupted, or if ancestral boundaries were violated, these lingering shadows could transform into a chipi, an agitated, powerful spirit capable of violently interacting with the material world. By 1701, European colonial expansion swallowed the region. The area was renamed Stratfield, a quiet farming parish carved out of the wilderness by English farmers. For nearly 2 centuries, the soil beneath Lindley Street was defined by simple boundary stones, rolling pastures, and isolated homesteads. During the American Revolution, it was a landscape populated by privateers, gritty colonial soldiers who used the nearby harbours to launch midnight raids against the British supply ships. But the earth would not stay quiet. With the arrival of the Industrial Revolution, the gentle peace of Stratfield was completely obliterated. Bridgeport grew rapidly into a gritty, smoke-choked manufacturing city. A city of brick factories, iron foundries, and industrial giants like the Warner Brothers Corset Company, whose factory operated there from 1873 until 1993. The remaining historic farmland was subdivided. Permanent grid lines were stamped into the mud, property deeds were hastily carved up, and in the post-war rush of 1960s, a small, unassuming 4-room residential bungalow was built at 966 Lindley Street. It was a home built for the modern working class. In fact, when Jerry Gooden purchased the property, he paid for it by working grueling shifts as a low-wage maintenance man for the local Harvey Hubble factory. The old world had been completely paved over by the new, but beneath the fresh linoleum and dark wood-panelled walls, the ancient landscape was merely waiting. To understand the terror that later filled that home, you have to picture the environment. The air inside the cramped bungalow was trapped in the heavy, familiar textures of 1974. The dull glint of avocado green linoleum in the kitchen, dark wood-panelled walls, and heavy vinyl armchairs. On Thursday, November 21st, it began quietly. The Goodens had their neighbours, the Holsworths, over for dinner. John Holsworth was a veteran police officer and a trusted friend, sitting together at the kitchen table sharing a meal. It was an unseasonably warm autumn evening outside, but mid-meal a sharp sound shattered the domestic quiet. In the back bedroom, a window had completely shattered. When Jerry and Officer Holsworth went to investigate, the room was empty. The children were accounted for, and no one had been inside. Yet the shrapnel of glass wasn't lying on the bedroom floorboards, it was showered outside on the lawn. The window pane had been violently pushed outward from inside the room, leaving the locked exterior winter storm window completely untouched. It was a deeply unsettling detail, but the family shook it off. They cleaned up the glass and chalked it up to a bizarre anomaly and finished their evening. Whatever happened that evening, it marked the beginning of one of America's strangest hauntings. The true breakdown of physical law waited until the next day. On Friday evening, the slow-burning tension exploded. While the family was in the kitchen, ordinary household objects suddenly turned lethal. Dishes flew out of the sink entirely on their own. floating momentarily before smashing to the floor. The heavy kitchen table groaned, tilting violently to one side as if someone were lifting it from below, flipping over and scattering groceries across the linoleum. Terrified, Jerry Gooden fled the suffocating environment of his own home. He ran out into the crisp November air, racing across the lawn to flag down Officer Holsworth for emergency help. When Holsworth stepped back through the front door, he wasn't a dinner guest anymore. He was a first responder entering a zone of absolute chaos. Nearby, two massive armchairs began to violently shake on the rug, their vinyl fabric groaning as if a frantic force was vibrating beneath the cushions. Then came the sound that haunted the responding authorities for decades. From the kitchen, a low, sickening metallic screech echoed. Holsworth rushed to the doorway and watched as the family's massive 300-pound refrigerator slid 6 feet completely on its own across the floor. When it stopped, Holsworth dropped to his knees. He checked the floorboards for grease, wires, hidden levers. There was nothing. The massive steel appliance had moved with crushing force, yet it left no scratches, no scuffs, no drag marks in the floor wax. It had moved without leaving any obvious sign of how. The escalation didn't take weeks, it took less than 72 hours. By Saturday night, the Bridgeport Police Department's internal confusion leaked to the Associated Press, who began broadcasting the events at Lindley Street nationwide. By Sunday, November 24th, the quiet neighborhood was unrecognizable. A gridlock crowd of over 2,000 onlookers, journalists from New York and curiosity seekers choked the asphalt, forcing police to erect emergency barricades around the property. Stepping directly into the bright lights of this overnight media circus were Ed and Lorraine Warren, the self-proclaimed paranormal investigators from nearby Monroe. The Warrens were master marketers, and where others saw a family in crisis, they saw a massive public event. They immediately took control of the narrative, bypassing the complex, strange, physical evidence reported by the police to install their own highly theatrical, lucrative conclusion that the bungalow was under siege by the Christian devil. In 10-year-old Marcia's bedroom, they pointed to a heavy scent of sulfur as absolute proof of a demonic presence. But if you strip away that loud commercial sensationalism, the real terror of Lindley Street isn't found in Hollywood tropes. It is found in something far more eerie, quiet, and deeply disturbing. But local gossip was turning against the family. While immediate neighbours like the Holsworths stayed silent, having witnessed the impossible firsthand, others on the block grew desperate to end the disruption to their lives. On Thanksgiving night, the street-level panic boiled over into violence. Under the cover of darkness, 3 local men slipped past the police line into the backyard and attempted to set the house on fire. When tackled by police and arrested for arson, their defense was chillingly pragmatic. They claimed they weren't trying to hurt the family, but to burn the house to the ground to force the lingering spirits out of their neighborhood. By the third night, the chaotic atmosphere outside the bungalow faded into the background. Inside, the tension peaked in the cramped living room in front of multiple police officers and family members. 10-year-old Marcia, the Goodens' adopted daughter, sat quietly in a heavy 1970s vinyl armchair, and right before their eyes, the room seemed to lose gravity. Without a sound, the massive chair, with the child still sitting in it, lifted several inches off the rug. It didn't launch or fly. It rose smoothly, performed a slow-motion tilt halfway between the floor and the ceiling before dropping back down to the floorboards. Marcia wasn't thrown. She didn't scream. The officers present simply stood in the dead silence, watching the dust motes settle in the cold air. To the local authorities, it was a terrifying breakdown of physical law. To the opportunistic investigators standing by, it was evidence of a devil. But to anyone familiar with the old landscape, within Pogoshet tradition, some might interpret events like those as the work of the agitated Chipi, a shadow spirit, or Kowawunk, asserting its presence over the living, 2 distinct cultures, centuries apart, looking at the exact same terrifying phenomenon, and drawing the exact same conclusion. By Monday morning, Superintendent Joseph Walsh had seen enough. The city of Bridgeport was hemorrhaging money on round-the-clock police details, the streets were gridlocked, and a vigilante arson attempt had nearly taken out a city block. The department didn't need a paranormal investigation, they needed an exit strategy. Calling an emergency press conference, Walsh handed the media exactly what they wanted, a simple, clean resolution. He announced that the entire affair was a fraud. According to the official statement, a lone investigator had secretly observed 10-year-old Marcia using her foot to slyly tilt a table while the adults were distracted. Under intense questioning by adult authorities, the terrified child allegedly confessed to fabricating the entire haunting to gain attention. Overnight, the narrative shifted. The newspapers that had screamed of demons on Sunday now mocked the Gooden family on Tuesday. The crowds dispersed, the police barricades were taken down, and the bright lights of the American media circus packed up and moved to the next town. The public left satisfied with a comfortable lie, but inside the police precinct, the men who had actually stood in that room refused to sign off on the superintendent's clean conclusion. Officer John Halsworth, along with several other responding officers, openly disputed the hoax theory. They knew the physics of the house. A 10-year-old child could not silently slide a 300-pound refrigerator 6 feet across a room on an unmarred floor. She could not cause a heavy glass window to explode outward from the inside of a bedroom while she sat in the kitchen. She could not cause a heavy glass window to explode outward from the inside of an empty bedroom while she sat in the kitchen. The confession hadn't solved the mystery, it had buried it. The department had simply used a vulnerable child as a scapegoat to restore order to the modern city street. The media left, but history records a different truth. By December 10, 1974, barely 2 weeks after the police department declared the case closed, the occasional rhythmic thumping returned to the floorboards. In the dead of winter, with the reporters gone and the streets empty, the television toppled over on its own and picture frames were thrown from the panelled walls. Driven out by the psychological toll, Laura Gooden would later describe the house not as haunted, but as somewhere she no longer felt safe putting her children to bed. In January of 1975, the local press ran a quiet headline, "None buy House of Happenings on Lindley Street." The property had become toxic. No one in the city would touch it. The Gooden family eventually abandoned the bungalow entirely. They spent the rest of their lives in obscurity, carrying the trauma of a week they were forced to call a lie. Laura Gooden died in June 1993 and Jerry remained in Bridgeport until his death in September 1997. Marcia, forever linked to one of Connecticut's most extraordinary mysteries, lived a quiet, private life away from the public eye until her reported passing in 2015. It's strange standing here today. The crowds are gone, the police barricades disappeared decades ago. Cars drive past without a second glance. If you didn't know the story, this would look like any other suburban street in Connecticut. But once you do know the history, it's hard not to wonder whether some places ever truly let go of their past. But the locals on the block still look at that specific patch of Pequannock land with a quiet, knowing distance. The modern world only builds over the past. It never truly replaces it. The loud theatrical stories of devils and demons eventually fade away with the 1970s news cycle, but the cheapy, the cold, disquieting shadow soul of the landscape remains, waiting beneath the soil, in the quiet and the dark until the boundaries are crossed once more.